Also, before we get started into mine, if you guys do have mailbag questions, go ahead and get those in now. They don't have to be related to this topic, but if you want us to address something in more detail in the mailbag period about this topic, you can do that too. Recruiting, team, college football, whatever the case may be. And since it's the off season, we'll even address some movie questions or food questions we've had a lot lately, but obviously we like to stick on football as much as we can. So we have a few of those questions up. Go ahead and get those in now while I'm stating my case. So Trevor, obviously I took the offense, and I called you as soon as you sent me the text. I sent you the text with no lead in, just hey, which side of the ball do you think is gonna be most impactful? And you responded with the defense, and you kind of stated your reason. I immediately called you. I said, okay, this is great. Then this is what we're gonna do on the show today, because for me it is offense. And it's not even taking a contrarian view. It's just I think the offense is going to be more impactful. And in order to kind of big picture talk about it before I get into each individual players, number one is I think the defense is going to have more players. It's 4-3. So there's obviously that edge to the defense. I think there's a chance that all 4 players play on defense. Elijah Hughes is the unknown. We don't know as much about him. We'll see. But at least 3 I expect to play a bunch and probably start. And or play starter snaps like we mentioned with like Jared Dawson as a D tackle, could potentially not be a quote unquote starter, but he's your best D tackle or your most impactful D tackle. Because sometimes when you have a guy that you're not going to play 50 snaps, you don't necessarily want him to start because you want his clock to start a little bit later. So you maybe get him in there on drive 2 or 3. That way you have a better shot of a guy that's only going to play 25, 30 snaps of being fresher in the fourth quarter. So you may not start him in that case. And he hasn't been a guy, as you mentioned, that was a heavy workload guy. So I do think the defensive class will be impactful. You have numbers. That's going to work for your advantage as well. But when I look big picture, a big reason why I went with the offense over the defense is there's several reasons why. Number one, I think the best player that they got in the portal is on offense. That's part of it. Now, that's just one guy. But it's one guy that I think is going to be very impactful. And I'll get into some of that a little bit more. And obviously, I'm referring to Malachi Fields. When I look at the defense also, Trev, I think outside of nickel, I don't think any of these guys were necessarily needs. Even defensive tackle, I felt like, hey, listen, I know that you are going to go to the portal, and I have no problem getting the guys they got. I mean, you'd be silly not to go get Jared Dawson if he wanted to come play for you. And I'm going to have a film breakdown of him after I get back from vacation. I'm going to start doing some film breakdowns. It's going to be one of the new things we're doing here on the message or on the premium board after the spring. But, I mean, you don't pass up a chance to make your football team better or potentially better. So I'm okay going for him. I think Jalen Stroman was probably the guy that was the greatest need because I felt like a proven veteran at safety was important. Doesn't mean you're going to start him, but it was important to have that. And I think Devontae Smith is a guy that I understand him going for him just because of the different things that we've talked about with needing to get that nickel. But he was probably my second greatest need behind Jared Dawson as far as needing someone that you have to play. But I felt like there was options that they could have gone with there. And whereas when I look at what the point that I'm making is defensively, I don't think they necessarily take a step back if they don't get any of these portal guys. I don't think that they're in a situation where the defense can't be good. What I think the portal class does on defense, I think this is kind of what you were getting to, Trev. So correct me if I'm wrong. They solidify the standing of where they are now. I don't know that anyone's making the argument that the defense has a shot to be better next year because of the portal pickups. Now, it could be. I mean, Jared Dawson and Elijah Hughes could be studs. And Devontae Smith could be a huge upgrade at nickel, or Jalen Stroman could end up being, every bit as good as Xavier Watts. We don't know that. It could happen, but I don't think we're projecting that. Fair? We're not projecting Jared Dawson to come in and have 13 tackles for loss and 9 sacks and be a second-team All-American or first-team All-American. Is that fair?
Yeah, I'll say this. If Notre Dame's defense takes a step up from where it was at this past season, I don't think it's going to be because of the transfer portal class. The transfer portal class allowed them to maintain at the level that they were at in 24. But if they're going to be better than they were in 24, it's because Leonard Moore is another year experience. Bryce Young takes that step, so on and so forth. That's how I see it.
So we see it similarly. That's part of the reason when I look at the offense, my opinion changes, because I think offensively, you have a couple guys that are at the very least going to be rotation guys. And then only one guy that I feel for sure on offense starts. So then you have okay, well, you're talking about maybe 3 guys on defense start and only one guy on offense is certain to start. All right, well, again, tell me why you're going with the offense. And here's what it comes down to for me. It's not just the production of receiver versus DB. It's what are your needs? What do you need on this football team? And when I look at, for example, the injury at tight end, I felt you needed a tight end, so you met a need there. You have a lot of talent at receiver. It's very unproven. We have seen that not work out well for Notre Dame in the past, where they went with unproven but talented receiving corps. It didn't work out great in 2023. It didn't work out great in 2022 when they tried to go with veteran with young guys in 2022. Hey, hopefully this is the year that Lorenzo Styles figures it out and Deion Colsey figures it out. And, these are young sophomores and we're going to build around them. And Jaden Thomas is a sophomore. We're going to build around him. And it didn't work out great. I mean, you had a veteran in Braden Lindsey, but for the most part, your receiving corps was very young and it didn't work out great. So you have depth that helps kind of solidify the margin for error a little bit. But what this really comes down to for me, Trevor, is it really comes down to Malachi Fields. And there was somebody in the chat that made this comment, and that I think that I'll bring up here in a minute, that kind of shows the back and forth potential battle. Is I don't think there's anyone in this portal class that's going to have a greater impact than Malachi Fields as an individual player. And I don't think anything that they could do. So like if Jared Dawson comes in and has let's say that Jared Dawson does this. I'm just going to throw this out. Hypothetically speaking, let's say Jared Dawson comes in and has 37 tackles, 8.5 tackles for loss, 7.5 sacks. It's a heck of a year, right? That means all he did was repeat what Riley Mills did last year. And it's going to be tough for him to even get to that point. Let's just say that coming into the season that Devontae Smith has 37 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 5 pass breakups, and an interception. For him, that's a career year. That's the best year he's ever had. All that does is match what Jordan Clark did last year. And when you look at the nickel position in 2023, to your point, Trev, that you were making the point earlier about the difference between Thomas Harper and Jordan Clark last year. Jordan Clark, 37 tackles, 2 TFLs, 1 INT, 5 breakups. And then you look at Thomas Harper in 2023, and Thomas Harper had 39 tackles in only 11 games, 6 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, and 3 pass breakups, no picks. Just different players. And so if Devontae Smith does either one of those, he's just maintaining, and that would be a career. It's maintaining what was done. And poor Jalen Stroman is being asked by the way, you're stepping in the starting lineup for the most decorated safety in the history of University of Notre Dame, a 2-time All-American who's only one of 2 DBs to ever be a 2-time All-American in Notre Dame, joining the Mr. Todd Light in 88-89. And that's a challenge. I mean, that's a tough deal. So when I look at the defense, Notre Dame's defense maintaining isn't so much about the portal guys. They've got to fill roles, but it's going to be about other guys elevating. It's not going to be about Jalen Stroman being the next Xavier Watts. It's Jalen playing his best football, and then a Don Schuler raising his game. It's going to be about Jared Dawson just coming in and playing your game, be the best version you can be. But for them to still be as good at D tackle next year, it's not going to be about Jared Dawson. He could play great. It's going to be about Heinisch elevating, Rubio elevating, and that type of thing. Where on offense, the one guy you're asking to kind of come in your whole portal class and be an absolute dude is Malachi Fields. You're asking Malachi Fields to come in and say, hey, we're expecting you to come in and be that dude in our offense with a first-year starting quarterback, whether that's Steve Angeli. I don't count Steve Angeli as being a starter because he started a bowl game 2 seasons ago. He's a first-time starter. You treat him like a first-time starter if he's the guy. Same with Kenny, same with CJ, meaning you don't say, well, Steve started a bowl game 2 years ago, so let's ask him to throw 40 times in the first 2 games. No, you let whoever the starter is, you want to break them in to some degree, and your receivers have to step up and help with that. And so that's what you're asking him to do. You're saying, hey, look, we've been okay at this position in the last couple of years. I mean, Bo Collins was solid. I'm glad they went and got Bo Collins last year. He was at Notre Dame what he was at Clemson. He was that same guy. It's a solid football player, key member of your team, and you're glad that you had him. You look at the year before that in 2023, it was kind of back and forth who that was. It was Jaden Thomas at times. It became Jaden Greathouse at other times, went back to Jaden Thomas at times. I mean, you weren't really strong in that position, and Jaden Greathouse wasn't fit for that position, which is why his production just fell off the planet, when he was moved to the boundary position. And it really hasn't been a strength of the team since 2021 when you had Kevin Austin. And even then, Kevin was a really productive statistical player, had a big bowl game. But Kevin, in a lot of games against good defenses, just kind of didn't do a whole lot. I mean, he did nothing against Cincinnati. Those corners ate him up. I go back to really 2020 when you had a true difference maker in the boundary with Javon McKinley, who had good numbers. Pardon me. But the thing I loved about Javon is Javon was money in 2020.
Yeah.
Like he had his best games in the biggest moments, and that's what I liked about him. And you're asking this guy to come in and say, hey, listen, we are going to ask you to be the dude. We're going to ask you to come in and be our top playmaker on the outside. And obviously you had, Jaden Greathouse had a great breakout in the postseason, but you'd already landed Bo Collins. You'd already landed Malachi Fields when Jaden Greathouse had those breakouts. So now it's like I think Notre Dame always felt Jaden Greathouse could be that guy. But I don't know that they went into to getting him saying like he's a proven impact player right now. He hadn't proven himself to that degree yet. He is now. But even with that, you're still saying, hey, we're expecting Malachi Fields to be that dude. And there's nobody on defense that I think is even close to being asked to be that level of production. That's point one. But then the other part of that is, can you still be good on defense? Can you still be as good on defense or maybe even better if those guys don't have career years? And my answer is, yeah, I think so. If they're just solid backups, just like last year, Rod Hurd didn't need to be the player he was at Northwestern where he had 80-plus tackles. He just had to be a nice rotation player, and they were great at safety because of Don Schuler's emergence. If Jared Dawson just comes in and just repeats what he did at Louisville last year, and that's it, that's a really good pickup. That's a really nice addition because you've got other players. When I look on the offensive side of the ball, I see a guy that you're looking at and saying you have to elevate well beyond what we got from this position for the last 3-4 years. You need to be a game changer. You need to be a difference maker. That's what's expected from him. And if he doesn't give it to you, then that holds your offense back. And the other thing is, but you could say, okay, but what are you asking? What are you really asking of Malachi Fields? Okay, I'm asking, but you've said in the past, Bryan, that you just want Malachi to come be what he was at Virginia. And didn't you just say that if Jalen Stroman and those guys are just what they were at their previous schools, that's helpful? Yeah, absolutely. Here's the difference. Those guys were good football players at their schools. Malachi Fields, in my opinion, was a stud at Virginia. Right? Because the numbers represent and how he got those numbers, Trev. I mean, I sent you some. Did I send you any of the Virginia film? I need to send you some of the Virginia film. But this guy was a difference maker on with a bad quarterback situation. And so it's like, if you just play the way you played at Virginia, your production will go higher and your impact will be more significant because of the team that you're playing on. And that alone makes me lean towards the offense because it's a much greater need than anything I think that they needed on defense. All those guys on defense are welcome additions, and they will help that football team, and your margin for error is much greater, or is much more, it's much greater with those guys on your football team. We would all agree on that. But I think one of the things I asked you is, who's the stud? Who's the real impact player? And then you explained it about Jared Dawson and all that. But Jared Dawson playing his best football and Malachi Fields playing his best football, to me, is not close of who's the better player. So that's a big part of the conversation for me. And then when you add in, you're bringing in another guy in Will Pauling who's had over 1,000 yards the last 2 years. You're a guy that started at the Big Ten level. I mean, so have all those, obviously Jalen Stroman and those guys are all starters at the P4 level. Devontae Smith was a starter this past year for Alabama, right? That obviously that's impactful, but you're talking about a guy that's got 116 catches for 1,244 yards and 9 touchdowns this last year as a receiver, which is better than anything the guys that they brought in last year did for their careers. And he's not even the guy you're excited about. I think that two-man class. So I think what Will Pauling does for the offense is kind of what Jared Dawson and Devontae Smith and Jalen Stroman do for the defense, which is you come in and play your game, it solidifies that room. It raises the floor of that room. I don't know that anything Will Pauling could do raises the ceiling for the offense. I don't think anything Jared Dawson does raises the ceiling for the defense or the defensive line. I don't think anything Devontae Smith does raises the ceiling for the defense or the secondary. And I don't think anything that Jalen Stroman does raises the ceiling for the defense compared to where it was, the secondary compared to where it was. And I think the same thing of Will Pauling. But I think his impact is similar to what we're saying of those other defensive players. And that leads me back to to Malachi Fields, because what we're asking him to do is not just raise the floor, but to raise the ceiling. I think that's when you talk about impact, we're not talking about production per se. At receiver, the production is a byproduct of the impact, right? But you and I have seen guys put up numbers, and it's like, yeah, but I know he had did you know Notre Dame had a 100-yard receiver in the title game against Alabama? They did. Didn't matter. A lot of it came late, but DeVaris Daniels had 100 yards, I believe, in that game. And, those are things I look at, Trev, and that's the one thing Malachi Fields is being asked to do that none of the other guys are really being asked to do. And I think that has an impact. And then I think the injury to Cooper Flanagan, in my opinion, really increased the need for Ty Washington. Now, he doesn't really move the needle for me outside of meeting a need because he just hasn't played a ton of football. He hasn't been overly impactful in college. He had a really nice game in 2023 against Ole Miss. So, and he's got some good film, but he just hasn't done a lot in his career. And so it's hard for me to really say, oh yeah, he's closer to Elijah Hughes than he is any of the other guys that Notre Dame has landed in the portal. I think is that fair to say? I mean, he had 2 catches this past year. He caught 11 passes for 170 yards the year before that and 1 for 17 the year before that. And his all 11 of his catches for 170 yards in 2023 came in a 4-game stretch. He had more catches that year with 0 or 1 catch than he had with more than 1. He's literally has 1 career game or 2 career games with more than 1 catch. In one of those games, he had 2. And then, of course, but he had a great game against Ole Miss. 2 years at Ole Miss in 2023, had 7 catches for 90 yards and 2 touchdowns. So you look at it and say, well, yeah, he did very well in that game. But I think you and I both probably think about, well, we also saw Chris Mitchell have a 6-catch, 157-yard performance on the road against Arkansas in 2023. And that didn't translate either, because it's not about that one game. It's about, okay, what kind of overall, impact did you make in that particular game? And so that's kind of how I look at that one. I need to see a lot from him, but I do like the pickup. I just need to see him do it on a consistent basis is a good number 2. So those are all things that factor in. So I do expect there to be some impact from the offensive guys, similar to what the defensive guys are. Hey, just come in, do your thing. You're going to raise the floor. You're going to help solidify the depth chart, and you're going to be good players. But when I throw in what they're asking Malachi Fields to be, it's impossible for me not to think that. And that means you're going to put him in the boundary as the primary boundary guy. You can move him around and stuff, but he's your primary boundary guy. You're asking him to be a big play weapon for you. You're asking him to be a chain mover for you. You're asking him to be a matchup problem for you where it forces other teams to defend you a certain way because of his presence. You're asking him to be a punisher. And what that is for me is, as a receiver, is when you have teams, when you're a good running team and teams are going to try to impact your run game, or if you have a really good player at receiver opposite a certain player who teams are going to focus a lot of attention on, whether it's Greathouse or a tight end or a player in the past, do you have that guy that can punish those teams for playing him man-to-man or one-on-one or not helping or over-focusing on other parts of the team? That's what you're asking Malachi Fields to be at times. So I think the impact of his role and his production and how he impacts everybody else around him, I don't think there's anybody else in this portal class that's going to have a greater impact on the entire operation than what I think Malachi Fields can have for this offense. Now, again, we don't know what any of these guys are actually going to do, but what we're projecting him to do or what the expectation is that he will add, nobody has more pressure on them than Malachi Fields. I would say Jared Dawson is probably second. And then you could either argue Smith or Stroman is third. Probably Smith because I think there's more of a greater need there. So that's sort of my argument there, Trev, of why I look at this and believe that the offense is going to have the greater impact, because I don't think anybody is going to come close to the impact, not just statistical, but the impact on this team that Malachi Fields is going to have. And he gives you something you just didn't have. I mean, he's same height as Bo. He's actually taller than Bo Collins. He's about at least an inch taller than Bo Collins. He's about 15 pounds heavier than Bo Collins. He's longer than Bo. He's faster than Bo. And he's been more productive than Bo in the same league with way less quarterback talent in the room. And so I have very high hopes for what Malachi Fields can do. And we saw him do it against pretty good teams this year. I mean, heck, he had over 80 yards receiving against Notre Dame, including a big play early in the game. So, Trev, that's why I view the offense as better. I think I spent time talking about both guys. I think what's going to really so I think right now the offense is slightly ahead. And there was a comment in the chat that kind of spoke to this. It was from Frank G. He said, I think Fields is the most important and talented transfer. Agree. In contrast, I think as a group, the two D linemen and Stroman, as a group of impact, the defensive, in contrast, I think as a group, the two D linemen and Stroman as a group will impact the offensive, will have more impact than the offensive group is the more important group of transfers, right? So I think there's a good case to be made. And when I told you why I think the offense is right now. What's going to determine this answer at the end of the year is not just going to be Malachi Fields. If Malachi Fields does exactly what we think he's going to do, and the other two guys do nothing, but Jared Dawson's like an impact pass rusher, Devontae Smith is just as good, if not better, than Jordan Clark, which I think he could be. If Jalen Stroman just comes in and just repeats his 2022 and 2023 seasons at Virginia that he had at Virginia Tech, just repeats those at Notre Dame, you've got a really good safety tandem. Because with Stroman, you've got to take away who he's replacing and just say, okay, he's not Xavier Watts. Can Notre Dame be really good at safety with those two players? Not compared to what it was with Xavier, or compared to what it was with Kyle Hamilton, or compared to what it was with Alohi, or compared to what it was with Harrison Smith. It's in 2025, can that be one of the best safety tandems in college football? And I think it can. And if Stroman does that, and Smith does that, and Dawson is an impact player, basically, I think Jared Dawson could do all season what we saw Donovan Hinish do late in the year. I think he can do that all year, but do it with 30 extra pounds on him than what we saw from Donovan, and be a little bit more impactful against the run. What's going to determine, I think, ultimately, and which ends up being right, is going to be the complementary players on the offensive side. Does Ty Washington come in and give you 15, 20 snaps a game, and can he catch 10 to 12 footballs? Can Will Pauling be a really important part of the receiving corps that can catch minimum 25 to 30 footballs? Let's say 20 to 25 footballs. I think if that happens, then that's another reason why I think the offense is because I'm projecting that. If they end up getting beat out by other players or they just don't perform well, then it'll be a lot harder for one guy, no matter how impactful he is, to be better than potentially 3 and maybe even 4 if Elijah Hughes forces his way into the rotation. But right now, I do believe that the addition of Will Pauling, even if he's just your number 4 receiver that catches minimum 20 passes, combine that with what I think we're going to get from Malachi Fields, I think that elevates the room and the ceiling of the offense, where I don't think anyone on defense elevates the ceiling. I think they all elevate the floor, or at least they may keep the floor where it was. They don't raise the ceiling. I think just those 2 receivers alone raises the ceiling of expectations for the offense compared to what it was last year as a receiving core, but also what the needs are of this football team with first-time quarterbacks that are more pocket presence players, guys, than what Riley Leonard was, who was more of a dual threat, all-around type of guy. There was such a greater need for a possession guy like Will Pauling, a impact guy like Malachi Fields were tremendous additions to this football team, especially in the spring when we're not going to have Jordan Faison in the spring. We will have Will Pauling in the spring, and I think that's going to be important as well. We won't have Malachi Fields in the spring, but I just think all those things for me, Trev, are why I look at it and say, I think the offense is going to be the best. And I think Aiden Benami, I think it's offense, and I'm solely riding on the Fields being a dog. I mean, I that's kind of where I'm at, but I don't think Fields alone guarantees it'll be offense, because I do think those 3 guys on defense, maybe 4, could be impactful. For it to be offense, because again, what we said, we're not saying who's the most impactful player, because I think if I were to ask you who's going to be the most impactful individual player from this portal class, your answer would be what, Trev?
Malachi Fields, for sure.
Right, exactly. So we agree on that. It's what group is going to be more impacted. And that's why I think they do need at least one other guy to step up for my side to be right. But I think one of those 2 is going to be impactful in a role for them. Even if it's like a Chris Brown role, an Amir Carlisle role, something like that. I think one of those 2 guys, Ty Washington or Will Pauling, is going to have that complementary impact that just raises the whole thing for the offense.
Yeah, I think that's all totally fair. I think it's interesting, some of the parallels between the offensive and defensive transfers, because you go through and you look at the offensive side of the ball, they're all pass catchers. Now, their impact can go beyond that, because we saw Notre Dame's wide receiving core play a huge part in downfield blocking. It's one of the reasons why they had such explosive plays. That, combined with, I think they have the best running back room in college football coming back, and they had one of, if not the best running back room in college football last year. But Notre Dame receivers took a lot of pride in blocking, which I think speaks volumes for playing in an offense that wasn't pass heavy. I think that's a big ask of a receiver, and I think that was really impressive last season. Now, but with that being said, Notre Dame still doesn't have a starting quarterback. And so there's 3 offensive transfer portal guys that are coming in that are all pass catchers, and they don't know who QB1 is going to be. Now, I do believe that regardless of who it is, they're all 3 pass-first guys in a Mike Denbrock offense going into a second year. I look at the defense in a similar light. They just got a defensive coordinator. We don't know what that's going to look like. So it's interesting, some of the parallels between what the offense has going on versus what the defense has going on. So I do think that's interesting. Some of the, I'm kind of in a similar boat as you are. You answered a lot of my questions when you were going through. A couple of them for me, the first one, is it Malachi Fields specifically, like him as a player? Because I went back through and I looked at some of the other portal wide receivers that were out there. And one of them that stuck out to me was Isaiah Horton from Miami. Mm-hmm. Now, they would also probably ask him to come in and be a boundary guy. He's 6'4", he's over 200 pounds, and he played that role for Miami this past season. He had 1 more catch than what Malachi Fields did, about 192 less yards, same amount of touchdowns. Malachi mm-hmm. Fields was a more efficient receiver in 14.7 yards a catch. Isaiah Horton was at 11. Mm-hmm. But and now mind you, this is a hypothetical because we're talking about what the transfer portal class is, not, but would your opinion change at all if they brought in an Isaiah Horton and not a Malachi Fields? Because I believe that the same responsibility would be put on Isaiah Horton. If, hey, we need more production from our boundary spot. Would your opinions on the offense be the same if it wasn't Malachi Fields, but a similar player?
Well, similar talent or impact, it would have to be that. Like Isaiah Horton's numbers were really good. And we talked about Isaiah Horton in our top 25 show when we were talking about Alabama and why one of the reasons I like Alabama, because you're getting a big-bodied Isaiah Horton type of presence to complement Ryan Williams. Absolutely. I think that's a big pickup for Alabama. And I think it's just as important that they filled that boundary need that Notre Dame filled their boundary need with Malachi Fields. But if you're going to say who got the better of that deal, I'd say it's Notre Dame because
Fair.
I think he's the better player. So, like, let's say Bo Collins would have come this year, not last year. Would I still have the same feeling that I do? No, I'd probably say he has the most important task. He has the most important job. I don't think he's their best portal pickup. He wouldn't even be their best portal pickup, much less what Malachi is being asked to do. So it is specific to Malachi. I think Malachi is one of the 10 best returning receivers in college football next year, just talent-wise, not production-wise. And so then I look at, say, okay, well, like all those numbers that he had at Virginia, or I mean at Miami, those things are all true. And I don't disagree with you. And again, that's one of the reasons I love that pickup. And it was in the same league, so there's some level of comparison between what they did.
Yeah.
But then the other comparison is, well, when you look at the two teams, Miami threw 489 passes and Virginia threw 401. Miami's quarterbacks completed 67% of their 489 passes, and Virginia's quarterbacks completed 61.3% of their 401 passes. So it's 246 completions compared to 328 completions. Miami had one of the best quarterbacks in college football last year. Virginia had one of the least effective quarterback rooms in all of college football last year. So what would his numbers have been like at Miami, especially if he had like Xavier Restrepo and what was it, the Brown kid, Sam Brown, and Jacoby George and Elijah Arroyo taking some of the heat off of him? Like you see, so that it's not the numbers per se, Trev, and that's a very good question, very fair question. And I love that you brought up a guy that we were just praising a week ago, because that makes it a fair, because I'm high on him, so it makes a very fair comparison. But I still think Malachi's the better player, and he's more proven as a one. Now Malachi 2 years ago was their number 2. He complimented the Washington kid.
Yeah,
it's a Malik Washington, right? And he had similar production in a different type of offense. Well, this past year was in a completely different offense, as I mentioned. He had to be the guy. He was the focus of the offense. Isaiah Horton was never the focus of the offense. The offense. Restrepo was. He was always the guy, and you had Cam Moore doing his thing. So that factors into it as well. So the numbers don't mean as much to me. It's the talent. It's what ability do you bring to the table? And that's where I would say my expectations would be they're asking him to do the same thing that they're asking Malachi Fields to be. We would agree that if Isaiah Horton was the guy they brought in, you'd be asking him to be the same type of impact player that Malachi Fields would be. So my expectations would not change. My confidence level in those expectations being met at a really high level would be not as great. Kind of like with Bo. I mean, Bo, we said if he can do this, if he can do that, he's shown flashes. But what we do know about Bo Collins is he's a solid football player. He's a good football player. And he was a good football player for Notre Dame this year. Is he a game changer? That's what we didn't think he would be. Our expectation last year was who was going to be the guy on a receiver last year. Our expectation going to the season was it was going to be Jaden Greathouse. We thought Chris Mitchell might have a bigger impact than Bo Collins. So Bo became your number 1 guy, but I don't know that any of us thought he should have been or would have been coming into the season. It's just kind of how it played out. But he wasn't the number 1 in the postseason. You had other guys stepped up. Where Malachi is like, he is the reason that you're bringing him in to give yourself a better chance to beat Ohio State and beat Texas and beat Oregon and beat those teams.
Yeah.
And he's more capable of it. His skill set allows him to be more capable of it. And that's why I would say, no, my answer would not be the same. Just like if they'd have brought in a Kevin Concepcion, he had good numbers. You know my stance on that. I would not have been fired up about that at all because he didn't meet the need as well.
Yeah.
LSU got a couple really good portal pickups at receiver in Bryan Brown and Nick Anderson.
Mm-hmm.
I would have taken either one of those guys at Notre Dame, but I would not have. I would have, and maybe Nick Anderson would have been thrust into the same role that Malachi Fields is being thrust into. I would not have had the same level of confidence. He could be the every down difference maker that Malachi can be. So there have been plenty of portal pickups that would have like, hey, you improved your room by getting that guy. But to me, Malachi Fields was the best receiver in the portal for what Notre Dame needed. And the only other guy that I would have really been super fired up about probably is Eric Singleton. Dane Key is a good pickup for Nebraska. I think Brown and Anderson are good pickups for LSU. We've talked about some of the other guys that I think are going to be good portal pickups. I think Isaiah Horton was a really good pickup for Alabama. It gives them that really big-bodied complementary guy on the opposite side to what Ryan Williams is going to do this year. But I felt like Malachi Fields is one of arguably the three most gifted receivers, period, but the best fit for what Notre Dame needed on top of being that elite player. And that's what factors into it for me. So it's a very good question. Very good question.
No, that's fair enough. I mean, I appreciate that, man. It was, I think, worth the discussion because I'm in the same boat as you. Notre Dame got the right guy for what they needed. And not only just does he fit the bill of what Notre Dame needs, he's also very, very talented. I do believe that he is also one of the best wide receivers coming back in college football this upcoming season, which is nice to say because Notre Dame hasn't had one of those in a very long time. I think Jaden Greathouse can be. I think he can get there. I think they have some guys on their roster that could be. They're just not quite there yet. So the only other question that I had is you mentioned how a lot of the defensive portal class were not necessarily needs. That would probably be my only pushback is I think that the defensive side, they are coming in to fill – the majority of the class are coming in to fill starters who left. But on offense, I think that answer is only for Malachi Fields. Yes, Chris Mitchell's leaving. They brought in Will Pauling. Fair. But that would be my only pushback.
I agree.
Because I'm with you on I think the impact of adding in a Will Pauling. Like, let's just say – he just does exactly what Chris Mitchell does, like barely over 200 yards, 2 touchdowns, which would be, I think, outside of his, freshman year, his least productive season in college.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But then you compound that.
Sophomore. He had 12 catches for 122 yards as a sophomore at Cincinnati.
Okay.
But at Wisconsin, he went for 74 catches, 837 yards, and 6 touchdowns in 23. And this past year had 42 catches for 407 yards and 3 touchdowns in only 10 games.
Okay.
So, yeah. Sophomore year.
So, but even with Will Pauling, to the points that you brought up, if Jaden Greathouse continues to ascend and stay on the track that and when I mean the same track, I don't mean he's going to go for multiple touchdowns and over 100 yards in every single game. Because if that's what happens, I mean, we're having a lot more fun conversations than just how was the transfer portal class. But if Will Pauling just does what Chris Mitchell did, Malachi Fields is who we think Jaden Greathouse continues to ascend. This is going to be one of the better passing offenses that Notre Dame has had in the better part of a decade. So that I agree with. But like I said, the only thing for me, the only pushback that I had was I think defense, and this is kind of what factored into my decision. I think defensive guys are coming in to start. And you could make the same argument for offense, but if Devontae Smith doesn't come in at nickel, you're either asking that of a true freshman and one of Dallas Golden or Mark Zachary, maybe a Cree Thomas, or you're asking a guy like Bronte Johnson to change his position, which I think would have been interesting. Whereas like Ty Washington, you and I are in the same boat. I like the upside. I think Ty Washington's also going to be in South Bend for multiple years, right?
He has 2 years left as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe so.
So I view him in Elijah Hughes in the same boat. But I
don't think Notre Dame's expect him to come in and like, oh my gosh, like we expect him to be our dude. If he becomes that, that's great. That's like, wow, okay, he was better than we thought he was going to be, but it's not what he was brought in to be.
Totally. Totally. But yeah, no, those are good points, man. That's what makes this conversation so interesting is because it's almost like there's no wrong answer. You know what I mean? Like there is no, I think both cases are valid. I do after hearing your argument, I am still sticking with the defense, but there is more projection on the defense, I guess, if that makes sense. Like, can Jalen Stroman stay healthy? Can Jared Dawson play that amount of snaps? Yeah, can Elijah Hughes develop?
Yeah.
Whereas on offense, like if Malachi Fields comes in and just does what he did, not can he take it a step up. If he comes in and does what he did in 2024, he becomes one of Notre Dame's better receivers in the last 5 years.
If Jared Dawson, Devontae Smith, Jalen Stroman, and Elijah Hughes all just repeat what they did last year, it's a really good portal class on defense.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that helps you. None of them have to play beyond what they did to have an impact. And they could all just be somewhat near there. They don't have to necessarily be as good. Just that helps the defense, but it doesn't none of it actually, like, okay, now you weren't going to be an elite defense, but now you are because those guys repeated what they did last year. As I said, it raises the floor. If Malachi Fields repeats what he did last year, it's more impactful because he was more impactful, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But he's also the one guy that I think has the best chance to exceed the impact and production that he had in the previous school because of the supporting cast. Whereas those guys were all part of a supporting cast. Jared Dawson was the supporting cast at Louisville. He wasn't their dude on the D-line. He was a part of a good D-line. He was a complimentary player. He was a good football player. I'm glad they got him. Jalen Stroman was a good football player. He was never, I don't think, Virginia Tech's best defensive player or even one of their couple best. They didn't ask him to do that. Now, he would have had to be that this year, but he got hurt. And Devontae Smith is like, dude, do your job, do your role. He's a niche role player. Now, it's an important niche and it's an important role, but it's not the same as Jordan Clark had a heck of a year for Notre Dame. He played half the snaps that Xavier Watts played. Half. Actually, less than half. But with Malachi Fields, it's like, look, dude, you are the guy in the pass game. You are meant to be the big time playmaker that doesn't complement Jeremiah Love, but protects Jeremiah Love. And so I think that's just the expectation is so much better. But as I said, the reason that I'm going, if it was just about Malachi, I'd probably still go with the offense just because of how important it is. But I wouldn't feel as confident in it. I think they do need one of the other two guys to be a key rotation player, key role player. And I think they're going to fill that. I think they're both going to play. I think Will Pauling is going to catch at least 15, 20 passes this year, if not more. And I think Ty Washington's going to be a solid number 2, number 3 tight end in the rotation, which is going to be good. You add those solid pieces to the number 1, and I just think it makes it's like you're almost okay. This is going to sound crazy, Trevor, and so tell me if you think if I've gone off the deep end on this one. I almost feel like you're asking Malachi Fields to do at receiver what you asked Riley Leonard to do at quarterback, meaning you've got to come in here and you've got to elevate everyone around you. You've got to make everybody else around you better. Your performance is meant to protect Jaden Greathouse and make him better and make the Z's better and make the tight ends better and to punish people in the run game. You're coming in here to be that guy that changes the game, that changes what this room has been, that changes what this offense has been. And that's what Riley was asked to do. In a very different way, quarterback versus receiver, but I don't know that anyone on defense is being asked to do that. It's like, hey, come in, it's just your role and know your role. And that's another thing that kind of factors into it, Trevor. I just think it's so significant what you're hoping he can be and can add that it changes the game. Now, we don't know if it's going to happen, and that's the big unknown, right? But that's what you're expecting him to be. You're expecting him to change the makeup of your football team by his presence, by playing his game.
I think that's absolutely fair because you can go back through and you can make a list of players that almost reestablished a new foundation, set new expectations for each position group. I think it's absolutely fair to say that that's what it was for Malachi Fields. All things being relative, because to your point, a wide receiver's impact different than a quarterback's. But Riley Leonard showcased last year in a different way than what some of us thought that it was going to be, but what the standard of play was at Notre Dame. When you get to the postseason, you need your quarterback to be that dude. And for a lot of the postseason, Riley Leonard was, but it wasn't just specific to last year, to your point. I mean, Cam Hart, Julian, you could even go back to Julian Love almost, but there was a little bit of gap in there. But, Julian Love, Cam Hart, they kind of reestablished what the new standard was for Notre Dame at defensive back. You go all the way back to the early 20 teens, if not 2012, to talk about the offensive line and what Zach Martin and Chris Watt did to reestablish, hey, this is what the standard is at Notre Dame. Now, in this day and age, I think it is more accepting to say, hey, this is what the expectation is out of this position group at this program specifically, and it doesn't just have to be homegrown guys. We saw it last year with Riley Leonard. Malachi Fields has all that potential. So, no, I don't think that's crazy at all because you need guys like that. And they've had wide receivers do it before in the past, but this jump was needed. So, yeah, I think that's totally fair. Totally fair. Do you have anything else left about the offensive transfer portal class, Bryan?
No, just kind of looking through some of the comments that were made. I think we brought a lot of them up. Yeah, I think, I don't know that anybody's opinions were changed. I don't know that anyone's minds were changed, but I do think it was good debate. But I think what we saw in the chat, Trevor, is that a lot of people in the chat have the same thought that you and I had, which is I feel it's this side, but it could be over here because of reasons. The people think it's defense are like, yeah, I'm team defense right here, but that Malachi Fields argument is pretty convincing. People that are like, I'm on offense because it's Malachi Fields, but that defensive thing is really compelling because D tackles and you're going to have a starting nickel and that kind of thing. And it's the numbers and all those type of things. But I think at the end of the day, for me, the reason it's an easy answer for me is just because if everybody just repeats what they've done, nobody comes close to having the impact that Malachi Fields is going to have.
Sure.
And I also think that we're barely talking about a guy that over the last 2 years in the Big Ten, caught 70 some passes for over 1,000 yards. And we're barely talking about him. Why are we barely talking about him? Number one, we like the talent that's coming back at the position, but number two, that's how much I think the expectation is that Malachi Fields is going to be an impact. But I mean, Will Pauling, the last 2 years in the Big Ten, had 116 catches for 1,244 yards and 9 touchdowns with not very good quarterback play either. And I think perhaps we're maybe dismissing the role he's going to have. But the reason I struggle with Will Pauling is because how he was used at Wisconsin is not really like how receivers are used at Notre Dame. There's some of that. I mean, if anything, he's pretty much used the way Jordan Faison was used for a chunk of the year. Yeah. Quick game, possession stuff, move the chains, all that. I don't know how much of an impact he's going to he's going to have in certain areas because it requires me to project more than I have to project with the guys on defense. And for me, Trev, that does make it a little bit harder to kind of project Will Pauling because of that. I'd feel a little bit better if I maybe saw how he was used a little bit more in some of the specific roles. And I'm going to take a little deeper dive into the film, but I mean, when you kind of look at where he's lined up and different things that he's done and where he's played and things like that, it just, you look at it and you kind of say, okay, the projection's a little bit harder. I mean, he was primarily a slot guy at Wisconsin this past season. I mean, a big chunk of his production, it was in the slot this year. Almost all of it was in the slot the year before. And I don't know that that's going to be the case for him. I mean, are you going to really split carries with Jaden Greathouse, or is he going to have to play outside more and then do both? So there's a little bit more projection with him than if you just brought in Jalen Stroman and just asked him to do exactly what he did against Virginia Tech. There's a role in that in this defense, and I know how good he'll be. I don't think you can ask, because if Will Pauling just comes in our name and plays the exact same position he did at Wisconsin, he won't come close to doing the same type of numbers he did at Wisconsin because he's going to be sitting behind Jaden Greathouse. And I don't know how much you want to move Jaden Greathouse away from the slot. At times, sure. But do you want to just after back-to-back 100-yard games, just move him out to Z so you can put Will Pauling in the slot. I don't know if that's necessarily what they're going to do. Maybe they are. Maybe that is what they're going to do. I don't know that makes a ton of sense. I think having them, Will Pauling play both, have Jaden play both is fine. And maybe there's times when Jaden is outside and Pauling is in the slot, but there needs to be other times as well. Because, Jaden Greathouse showed he's a difference maker in the slot. Not just on the big plays, but he was clutch all year on third down from the slot.
Well, I think it begs the question. We could have an entire other show about this topic, but it's just, I think you're going to see more of Mike Denbrock moving the receivers around, similar to what he did at LSU, because you're going to have a bunch of different skill sets and some of the skill sets that are similar. Like you said, Will Pauling and Jaden Greathouse can do very similar things out of the slot. Will Pauling had a role very similar to what Jordan Faison had in this offense. Will Pauling had that at Wisconsin. And so I think you could see Mike Denbrock, just in the spirit of getting the talent on the field that deserves and needs to be on the field for Notre Dame in the fall. I think they can move him around quite a bit. But that was a really fun discussion. That was really cool. So, well, look, guys.
It was.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, guys, that's going to do it for this portion of the show. We're getting ready to move on to the mailbag, and we're starting to get some questions flowing in here. But before we get there, please be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family. Anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. Whatever platform you watch us on, we'd really appreciate a 5-star review, whether that's on Spotify podcasts or Apple Podcasts. And as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com.